Hello and welcome to another episode of What Makes You Click. Neil Mills. I'm Professor of Veterinary Behavioural Medicine at the University of Lincoln, and I'm joined today by my long-term friend, Celia Haddon. Hi, Celia.
Hi, hi, Daniel.
I could say old friend in your case, I guess. You don't mind comments about your age, I know. Um, Celia will be known to many of you because she is a prolific author. I have many of her books in front of me at the moment. A Cat to Train Its 100 Ways for a Cat to Train Its Human, 100 Secret Thoughts Cats Have About Humans, um, Chats with Cats, How to Read Your Cat's Mind, 100 Ways to Be More Like Your Cat, Feline Wisdom for Happy Humans, A Cat's Guide to Humans from A to Z, written by George the Cat, owner of Celia Haddon. And most recently, and most importantly, and I've noticed your books seem to get steadily bigger, Being Your Cat, which is out early March. What's really going on in your feline's mind? And it's got my name at the bottom as well. I was so thrilled that you asked me to co-author that with you. But I just, as I said, when I got the books together, I was thinking your career, your books get bigger as you go along. It seems.
Well, actually, they get
Um,
better when I have
but
co-authors like you.
it's very nice of you to say that. I set you up nicely for that one, didn't I? So Celia has a long-standing background as a journalist first and foremost, an author of prolific nature of topics, ranging from sort of gender issues and love issues, as well as cats. But also she's written about dogs and rabbits and shelter animals as well. And women and tranquilizers, I can see as I'm just glancing over at the list of some of your books. So very diverse authors. You were journalist for a number of both broadsheets and the Daily Mail, um, but I won't hold that against you too much. And I got to know you, as I said, I think when you were doing the sort of pet advice thing with the Telegraph. And then you came onto our master's course a few years ago, which was absolutely brilliant to have you there. Somebody with your diverse experience, but you've sort of come a long route into the animal behaviour, having qualified as as say in English literature from Cambridge initially. Then you went on and did an undergraduate degree in behaviour before moving on to the masters. Um, so when did you decide that, yeah, it was better working with animals than with journalists?
Well, I never thought we were incompatible, actually, but it kind of started as an office joke when I was on the Sunday Times, because I was on the magazine and I complained that I was the only one who didn't have editor in her title, which I didn't. And they said, "We'll make you pets editor." So I started writing funny stories about skiing Labradors, and that's really how it began. The
And
other
what was
thing
the story of the skiing Labrador?
Yeah, well, it was water skiing, actually, I think it was. I can't remember really. And Tiddles, the enormously fat cat that used to live in the ladies' lavatory in Paddington. I mean, it really lived there, and it was so huge it could barely walk. I mean, a terrible welfare issue now, but at the time I just thought it was funny.
Oh, right. So, I mean, so how did you end up though within the Telegraph? Was it you said that they decided that well you can write about pets
Yeah.
because you weren't writing about pets at the beginning.
Yeah, I'll tell you what really happened. I left. If you work as a journalist, you don't choose your stories. And I left to become freelance because I didn't want to have to write another story that was unpleasant to somebody, actually. I really hated doing those, you know. I did once write Mrs. Thatcher Milk Snatcher for The Sun, which I didn't mind too much, but there were other ones which I was not happy with. So once you're freelance, you can say politely, "I'd love to do this story, but I'm too busy," you know. And then I drifted around looking.
Sorry, just hang on. I'm going to jump. I just want to jump in. Did you coin the phrase Margaret Thatcher the milk snatcher? Was
No,
that
it
you?
was the Sun headline, but I wrote the story under. I wrote the story
Ah,
underneath, and a clever son
okay,
put that as the headline. I,
okay. Sorry, keep going. Sorry, just because that is such a famous.
it was a great moment. Actually, it flashed up on the TV the other day to my deep pleasure. Actually, I was looking around for a form of journalism where I wouldn't have to be horrible to anybody. And I had a stint as writing about gardens for, I think, the Sunday Express magazine. And then I drifted towards the Evening Standard hired me to write a little pets piece once a week. And then they changed editor, and the new editor asked me what I thought I was doing. And I said, well, I think I'm really having fun, and people enjoy fun with animals, which didn't go down too well. And then it was the Daily Telegraph who actually decided that they wanted something about pets in their weekend supplement that they were starting. And really, there wasn't any other mainstream journalism that had ever written about them apart from me. So they had to hire me. But I loved it. I mean, I really loved it.
So how many years did you do that for?
Well, I did the Daily Telegraph. I worked as, then they moved me onto being a pet agony aunt. And I said, I can only do this if I talk to experts, which is when I started getting in touch with people like you. And so I did about, I think it was about 20 years as a pet agony aunt. And I loved every single moment of that. It was great. And I learned quite a lot too.
I was going to say, it's a great way of cutting your teeth, because I used to sort of do the problem pages for a number of magazines as well, and you just sort of realise that, yeah, and you have to give concise advice that's also sort of good advice that does no harm, first and foremost. So it is a great way of cutting your teeth, I think, in the field.
And also, so loony about their animals. I mean, that's what makes it fun. They have wild ideas, you know.
Well, yeah, I think we project a lot of ourselves, don't we, onto our pets as well, a lot of the time. So, I mean, I've always thought of you primarily, until actually you did the masters with us, as a cat person, but I know you're passionate about amphibians and reptiles as well. And we'll get onto that in a little while. But I mean, what drew you to cats? I mean, were you always a cat person, or?
No, I was a dog person, really, but then a cat turned up, as they do, and had her kittens in my garden shed, and I took her in. This coincided with me being freelance, and I could manage to a cat more easily than a dog. I didn't fancy walking around at sort of 11:30 at night with a dog around London in the dark, and cats, have litter trays, and it sort of started there, actually. And then it sort of grew, like it does. It deepened. The addiction got worse.
So, I mean, so were you sort of a cat person at all, or was this sort of a new venture for you when the cat came into your life?
No, we've always had cats and dogs in my family home, and I had my own cat. Though in actual fact, he wasn't really. I mean, it was just a family cat. So there were 3 cats and 3 children, and we each quotes had close quotes a cat. So it wasn't that I hadn't had a cat. I think what really endeared me to cats, apart from the convenience, was the fact that I have a certain level of independence, so that actually you can, if you're busy all day, they will get on with their own stuff, usually. Perhaps not my current one, but most of them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, nowadays they seem to sort of delight in jumping in front of cameras on Zoom, but I have shut my cat out of this room, and I don't know if you've done the same, but who knows what will come.
I thought it'd be more fun if he turned up, actually, but he hasn't, you see. Now I want him to turn up.
Okay. That's part of being a cat, isn't it? So I mean, as I said, you've written a lot of cat books. Where do you get the idea for a cat book from?
Well, most of them were my ideas, apart from just one when they came to me. But the funniest one was when I said, let's do 100 ways for a cat to train his human. And they took it to the sort of chief executive of the publishing firm, who said, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard of. And he was male, and he looked around this room with about 6 women, and they said, don't be so stupid, Charles. It's not stupid at all. We've all got cats. So if you have a cat, you know.
Yeah, but where do the ideas come from? Because you've obviously got a very fertile mind. If you can turn out, I don't know, about a dozen books on cats, they are different as well.
I've got a list of ideas. I'm never short of ideas, actually. I'm often short of how to get the format right, or how to express them, because it's a key factor if you're thinking about a book. You just don't sit down and write the thing, except when it's a serious book. But for a funny book, you've got to kind of think of where you come from to write about it. So I mean, I'm not short of ideas. I'm just short of publishers who would like them. She's quite sharp and funny,
Mm,
and I like myself. I don't quite understand why, but I like the moral structure. I mean, she's not just writing about romance. This is, you know, this is she's got sharp things to say about unpleasant people or badly behaved young women, but or
mm.
you know, worthless young men. And also a strong grasp of the fact that for a woman, you know, it's going to matter a hell of a lot. I mean, think of the plight of women. That's why I don't have children, because you know, I don't have that urge to reproduce. And when I was young, I used to think to myself, if I have children, I'll never be able to have do interesting things in my life. I'll just have to sit at home and be a housewife, because I looked around me and that's what most of them were doing, apart from cleaning ladies. That's because of my
Yeah,
age.
I mean, well, yeah, it is interesting, and we recently at work there was somebody. I'm involved in a number of projects, and I won't go into great details, but and with a number of colleagues at work who are female, and I'm sure it was just coincidental, but the person, one of the sponsors of the project, dropped an email and saying they wanted to speak to me about extending the project. I'm thinking, there's three co-investigators here, and they want to speak to me, probably because I'm the bloke. um, and it's just that sort of stuff. Yeah, I'm sort of. I think I've probably spent most of my life largely blind to it, but it really did hit me then, especially because it was a female as well. But sometimes sexism is worse. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes it's worse with males or females. You can't go either way. Um, but I'm sure it was completely subconscious for this individual.
Mm.
Um, but but anyway, so we better go back to animals anyway. But what about cat and dog books and things like that? Have you got any favourites there?
Uh, Let me just think. I must have read oh Kipling, that Kipling book about a dog, Thy Servant is
Oh,
very sentimental. Um, uh, but I loved that as a child. And I liked also, if you look at the Just So stories, you know, and the Mowgli books, I loved. I loved the Mowgli books. And of course, wolves here aren't the savage wolf of you know, the um, tradition. These are wolves who are with a caring nature. But I also feel sorry for the dhole, Dhole, in the Kipling books, because actually they're canids too. And every now and again I look up the latest bits about dhole to see how they're doing, because they too are under stress from human beings, aren't they? So good old Kipling.
yeah, no, yeah, no, that's good. So, and this is going completely off topic. As I said, normally we talk about animals, but there's this big thing at the moment about people rewriting um, Roald Dahl stuff.
Mm.
So, Augustus Gloop is no longer enormously fat; he's enormous.
Mm.
Um, what's your take on that?
Well, I do think that
Okay.
the savages in one of those books, I can't think, the Oompa Loompas, I think it probably
Yes.
is better if we make them white rather than black as a start, because I do feel they are a bit racist, you know. And with children's books, it matters probably more than with adult books. There was a nice little book which actually wasn't, which nowadays wouldn't be published as they'd think it was racist, but about a little black Sambo. And the point is, the child here was so clever that he managed to outwit a tiger. Now, I'm sure that's gone because of the title, apart from anything else. But actually, that wasn't too bad. But I think the Oompa Loompa were pretty horrible, frankly. So I think we ought to look at children's books and do some rewriting. Personally, I'd like literature, the rest of literature, to be left alone. And if people want to rewrite it, they could publish both versions, couldn't they? Like, you know, King James's version of the
Yeah,
Bible and, you know, new
yeah,
translation.
no, that I think that's a fair point. having both versions. No, I'm just intrigued, as I said, because you're much more a literary person than me, and I just think, oh, and yeah, um, that there are certainly certain elements, but you, as I say, you could certainly say that about Kipling as well.
Yes, that's a bit more. That's a bit more difficult. But actually, if you read, yeah, Kipling, but he's not that bad actually, because he's in love with India. I mean, that comes across
Mm,
enormously. So that where he's racist, he's also in love with the mystery and exoticism of India. So with him, because he's, I wouldn't, because I think he's a very good writer. I would just, if you want it, have two versions. That'll suit me fine.
mm,
Um,
yeah, and and also what it's a difficult one because what we might consider racist actually, to what degree it was racist at the time. As you say, there were the social norms, and okay, treating people in certain ways, you could argue, but there wasn't an alternative perspective, I think, at the time in some of those situations. So I'm not condoning it, but again, I I do have concerns when people judge the past by modern standards, where
I
people
dislike.
didn't have the knowledge and understanding.
I know, I dislike that very much, actually. And I mean, if you take the snobbery out of Jane Austen, you're missing the point, because she was writing for a time when, for the women, if they didn't marry well, were ruined for life. So, you don't get the right flavour from it. So yes, I agree with you,
Hmm.
and I do think I do find it awfully difficult to remember to call people they. Equally well, it's pretty horrid when I met somebody who I hadn't seen for a long time, and he was now a man, and I failed to acknowledge this because I literally didn't. I still saw him as a female, because I just thought he was dressing a bit odd, if you really want to know, and he burst into tears, and I felt a real shit. So let's try and be kind. Whatever else we do, let's try and be kind. When in doubt, be kind.
It's a different. Yeah, well, yeah, no, I think that's a great bit of advice. And but it is. Again, I don't want to belittle this and whatever, and we're going off in all sorts of weird tangents. But people are also afraid to make a mistake.
I know.
I think a lot now, and we shouldn't be afraid to say I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Um, it's when you get these false apologies. I'm sorry if my words caused offence to you, i.e., I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry that you interpreted it in that way. Which you hear a lot out of politicians' mouths and captains of industry when they go and completely screw something up, and they ought to be offering an apology. They're not. There's that sort of false apology, but well, I make so many mistakes. I'm apologising the whole time. I don't have a problem with it. I think the issue is if you keep making that mistake. So, the friend that you upset because of their gender identity, I don't think you should feel bad about it. But and they need to be forgiving
He was. He was.
as well. Yeah.
And
Um,
Daniel,
so.
I mean, you ran into this. The problem is social media partly now, which make life much worse. You ran into this. Do you remember you did a study which suggested that cats didn't form attachment bonds like humans? Brackets. I know.
Oh, that's yeah.
And
So
I occasionally got death threats when I wrote about cats. Once I wrote saying that cats killed birds, and I got a few death threats. People go right over the top. And, at least in my day, they had to sit down, write a letter, and buy a stamp. Now they can abuse you online altogether.
yeah, so for people who don't know the story, we did some work where, well, mentioned about Bowlby, who did the original work with children that showed that the bond that an infant has with their parent or with their mother was sort of different to the relationship that they have with others, and you could demonstrate it by the fact that if the mother left the room, they would spend more time sort of by the door. They'd be more distressed at the separation than if they were with a stranger, in fact, like that. And it became Mary Ainsworth developed the Ainsworth strange situation test. It has since been used in dogs to show that dogs show similar reactions. And that was the basis for defining attachment And the word attachment in the literature has many different meanings, but I like the Bowlby view, which is that an infant is attached to the mother, but the mother is not actually attached to the infant. It's a different type of, the maternal bond is a different bond. Um, and I'm actually going to be talking about this at a meeting in a few weeks' time. But um, and because I think different types of bond, and a bond is what keeps you together, it's important to appreciate the different quality, and it depends on the content. So there'd been one study where people had looked at cats in a similar situation, and they reported that cats seemed to show similar responses to dogs and babies, and so they concluded that cats were showing that degree of attachment. And when you look at the paper, though, they base their results on the absolute time. Well, the cats spent twice as much time, if I remember correctly, or they certainly spent more time with the owner than they did with the experimenter. So, you know, there were various issues, and it's also there's been some concern over the degree to which the order of the tests is important. So we ran the study with a design where you ran the order one way and then the other way. The first thing we found was that the behavior of cats was incredibly inconsistent. So trying to take anything out of it was a bit of a nightmare. But when you looked at it, all you saw was increased vocalization when the owner was absent. You didn't see any of the other behaviors that you would associate with attachment. So they weren't seeking out things with the owner's scent, or, you know, necessarily interacting with the owner when they returned more than with a stranger in those situations. So, and I think the vocalization could easily be a conditioned response, and so suggested that actually this may not be an attachment bond in that narrow sense, but it's it may just be a response to frustration, and you know, and we should be cautious about that. Yeah, of course, we published the paper. We thought it was a really neat finding. Of course, some of the press get hold of it, and one paper I think had the headline "Scientists find out what we always knew: cats hate their owners." It goes back to what we were saying earlier about journalists wanting the story and not bothering. It's amazing because so few of them actually seem to read the paper or even any press release. It just became this viral meme, and yeah, it was just before Christmas, and I got several emails. I remember this person saying, "I've just inherited some money. I'm going to spend it ruining your career. You know, you shouldn't be allowed to do this, etc." And I'm just thinking, and yeah, no, I did have, I think, some death threats as well, from people, and you're just sort of. There was one thread though I remember that I read, and it came through that. You know, there was this long sort of, well, this person's terrible. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Da, 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 da. And then somebody inserted this thing. He clearly doesn't hate cats. Have you seen his webpage? There's a picture of him and a cat, you know? And, you know, clearly none of these people had read the actual work or what it was actually trying to say. Now I do have a colleague in the States who seems to think otherwise, and she's done some experiments, but I don't think they've got the necessary controls in place. And from my perspective, when I think about attachment, as I said, I think about attachment as the bond. The reason why an infant is attached to its mother is because it needs the mother for safety and security. And I don't think that the typical cat actually looks at the owner, their relationship in that way.
Yeah.
They're perfectly capable of looking after themselves. You know, they just lash out.
Yeah.
So why do they need the owner for safety and security? And okay, I think you can condition a cat, and I think there probably is a subpopulation. And we've subsequently did work on human-cat relationships. Maro Innes, one of my former master's students, did a fantastic study looking at different types of relationships. And my suspicion is that actually, particularly, I'd say particularly in cats, I don't know if it is, but to me it seems more noticeable in cats that how much their behavior can be conditioned in the relationship. And actually, yeah, the provision of food is a powerful conditioner in cats. So, people say, oh, you can't train your cats with food. Yeah, you certainly can.
Yeah.
There are a group of cats. I think the cats in their sociability are much more variable. Dogs are very hypersocial, almost across the board. So it's easy to use social reinforcement. Looking at a dog is enough to, and the dogs will work for that interaction with humans. There are some cats who will do that. So, but I think the vast majority of cats will respond to what are the situations that lead to the delivery of food. And I don't think that's an attachment bond. Doesn't mean cats don't love their owners. I hope too many people haven't switched off at this point and to write me hate letters about this. But no, it was a real eye opener as an experience. And as I said, and I've not had that degree of vitriol with any of the dog stuff that I've published over the years where I've questioned. And my my research has taken me along that journey where I'm actually there's lots of people working on cognition, and you can't totally separate cognition and thinking from emotion, but I'm increasingly convinced that the non-human animals that I deal with spend much more time in a largely emotional world than a thinking world. They're not rationalizing what's going on, they're responding to events as they personally affect them. um, and I think that going back to some of the tortoise stuff, this idea of rather than empathy being thought about the cognitive processes of I'm worried about how you're feeling and identifying with it. Emotional empathy doesn't require that degree of cognition in the same way as a lot of our feelings. We often elaborate with quite, with a lot of cognition. So something like jealousy in dogs, for example, or in cats, you don't need, when we think of jealousy, we think of somebody scheming, thinking, how am I going to bring them down, etc. You don't need that to have the basics of emotional jealousy. You just have to see that somebody is getting better, getting more for less.
Yeah.
And want to and be determined to do something about that in perhaps a competitive sense. It doesn't involve a lot of thought, and I think this is one of the problems, is that we when we anthropomorphize, sometimes we throw out the baby with the bathwater, in so much as we throw out the emotion because we're trying to avoid the cognition that humans often add to it. As I said, with humans, we can worry about things that are going to happen next week, whereas a dog just worries that the food's just fallen off the table or something like that. Yeah. They live in much more in the here and now in that way. But
we're only at the beginning, aren't we, of understanding this? I mean, we have a long way to go. We're only at the beginning. When you think that people like B.F. Skinner were saying animals don't have humans don't have emotions, we're a long way away from understanding how we think, let alone others. I love that book suggested to me, the book about ways of thinking, in humans. We're not rational all the time,
Oh God, no! The idea I think that's the most common error that's made, is that people think that humans are rational. No, we're emotional most of the time. We judge things on very simple, superficial characteristics. We're capable of being rational, and I think most of the time when we're rational after the event. We think we thought something through, and we offer that as an explanation. I hesitate how often to think that I actually think about something before I say it. I don't know what I'm going to say next when I'm chatting to you, and every time I think I know what I'm going to say, I've forgotten it by the time I finish what I was saying. So a lot of what we think we do for rational reasons is post hoc rationality. So the classic example: driving along, child steps out, put your foot on the brake. You think that you saw the child and whatever, and you therefore put your foot on the brake. By the time you were aware that there was a child, your foot was already on the brake. Your brain is doing an awful lot of stuff without bothering to tell you. And those emotional responses don't, if to think, you've got to have connections between lots of nerve cells. You've got connections between nerve cells, you've got slight delays. For emotional responses, you have a much faster way of responding, and that is absolutely critical. And most of the time, as I said, we pick very simple characteristics and respond to them. And that's an easy way of coping without overanalyzing things. And that's the way that, as I said, I think the world that most species inhabit. What we can do is, yes, we can stop and we can pause and we can analyze and decide on that. Um, but to think that we do that most of the time, I think, is a complete fallacy. Um, and yeah, just keep things simple. But just going back to the cat thing, the only time I've had it with dogs is actually in relation to the shock collar work that we've done. And I will actually, I'll share this with you because I have had people, um, ask me about this, and and I've always said that I'm willing to chat to anybody, and I am willing to chat to anybody, but I'm not willing to do a podcast with anybody, and I'm not willing to do a debate with anybody. I'm no good when it comes to debates. I love the book The Persuaders, written by a guy called Garvey, because he highlights how debate has moved from trying to get to the truth to trying to win the argument.
Yes.
If you don't know the book, it's a really good book, and the first two chapters, the first one, he talks about the old debating houses and how you'd have two people who would have an opinion on something that was different, and the idea is you had to debate, and one of the parties might concede and say, okay, I can now see your argument, and the idea was to work out where the truth was, and maybe it would be somewhere in between. The second chapter is about the first Iraq War, and it's somewhat spine chilling, I still find, because they tell the story. I don't remember the first Iraq War. America had joined in the first Iraq War after testimony was given to Congress about Iraqi troops going into a maternity unit and smashing them up. Now, I don't know if your late husband was involved in any of the reporting, but anyway, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the story that he gives me in the book, which I think. So, testimony was given to Congress on that Iraqi troops were doing this, but the testimony was given by a Kuwaiti on the condition that she could be anonymous, and ostensibly to protect her family in Kuwait. And Congress agreed that this would be allowed, and she gave the evidence. I think from behind a screen to Congress, explained that she'd witnessed this, etc. And then they held the vote, and I think it went by 4 votes that America decided they would go into Iraq. And the mess that is the Middle East is here. Now, I'm not saying America necessarily shouldn't have gone in the first place or whatever, but it was on the basis of this testimony. What is perhaps not more widely known, assuming this book is right, and as I said, you may be able to put me right if it's not, was actually it was subsequently found that testimony to Congress was set up by a PR firm, and the witness was a member of the Kuwaiti royal family. And it was just an exercise to try and win the argument to get America into the war. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't necessarily some of the stuff going on, but it was just that transition from debate being about trying to get to truth to trying to just win an argument to get people to go in a certain way. Before I carry on about shock collars, I don't know if do you know sort of the truth of that?
I don't know the truth of that, actually. Either way. I mean, my husband went to that war, but that's not the same as, he wasn't. I think I'd need to put some things in the United States. No. Go on.
But it's just to me, it's that. So the only other time I've had this sort of vitriol is in relation to the shock collars, and that has come about because some of the, well, as far as I can tell, certainly the industry employed some lobbyists. Now, those, in order to support their case. Now, I have no problem with somebody presenting information, but this got really personal. The Vice Chancellor of the university received letters saying that, Jonathan and myself have done this research, we should be dismissed because of these various things. And there's just this misrepresentation and twisting of the reality of the situation. And I'm quite happy to chat to somebody who uses shock collars, but because of the use of the lobbyists, and I'm saying this partly here for the benefit of somebody who I know listens to some of these podcasts, and whether or not he'll listen to this one. The reason why I was going to do a discussion with him, um, and uh, I then decided, I was given advice by the university in a different context, because some of the stuff that had come in to the vice chancellor's office was that I should not respond in any way to this group. Now, the problem I've got is I can't separate out the people who are genuinely interested in just having a discussion from people who've been provided with a script, because I'm seeing the same phrases about me being repeated. These memes are going around about research. The fact that I expressed an opinion previously, that I was not in favour of the use of shock collars, they then say, well, you've got a conflict of interest. No, I'm a scientist. And to think that a scientist doesn't have an opinion is completely naive. As a scientist, we all have opinions. We're human beings, but we are driven by the evidence that we find. And people don't get this, and they want to twist it to win their arguments. Oh, well, in which case your work has to be discounted, and you're a disgrace as a scientist because you've got this proven agenda in the other direction. They completely ignore the fact that I've done work on shock collars in cats with boundary fences, and we found no impact on welfare there. I think it's a different situation when you've got those sorts of fence systems and the cat is controlling the behaviour, as opposed to someone pressing a button, because humans are intrinsically bad at that. I also think it's a complete, this idea of, well, we're going to protect sheep and whatever. Your dog shouldn't be off the lead around sheep. It's as simple as that, And so that's not even a shock collar debate for me. But it's sad because, yeah, I would like, and at least in post-COVID world, I can potentially meet these people on a one-to-one basis. But I'm afraid the experiences that I've had with those sorts of lobbyists do make me very cautious. And to the point that I wouldn't put it past somebody to be recording a conversation that I was having with them, and because people will use your words against you. That's exactly what these lobbyists were trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame, because, and just to complete the story, just last week, one of my colleagues said, oh, there's this thing that's kicked off on social media amongst dog trainers, because somebody who's got a big podcast did an interview with someone who is pro shock collar, and they shouldn't platform it. No, I don't agree with that at all. I don't think it is about non-platforming. I think we do need to have debate. I'm not brilliant at debates and whatever. As I said, I don't tend to think very much in advance, and I might regret what I have to say. That's why I actually like writing, because I can reread it and change it and edit it, and even then I sometimes get it wrong. And of course, it changes as the science changes. But that's different. But the actual debate about things, I think it is important that people are given a voice. I'm not a great believer in censorship of speech. Um, in the current situation, just for the record, my feeling with the handheld devices is that I do not see in this country that they are necessary. And the onus must now be, if people want to advocate they are retained, they need to produce some pretty good evidence to show why they are necessary. Because the evidence just points that they're unnecessary, and there are methods that involve less risk, and given the sort of principles that we operate by, we should be using those. So whether or not I'm going to get hate mail, as I said, there's plenty of people who use shock collars I can have a great conversation with, absolutely, and I do not want people to go away thinking, oh well, he's anti those. I'm not anti the people. My advice always has been, when people say to me about they're interested in clinical behaviour, what should they do? And I say, go and see practice with as many people as possible, even people you think you're not going to like what you see, because you will learn something. And it might be that you don't want to train animals that way, but it's much better to do it from the point of view of experience. And yeah, when I first used the university, we had a shock collar that we had in the clinic. but times have moved on.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, that's my sort of rant, but it just sort of this is meant to be about you, not me.
I'm doing my job, you see, as a journalist. I'm getting you to talk.
Yeah, that's the last thing. I was trying to be quiet while you were talking. I was thinking you're giving me very short answers, and I don't know. This is going to end up as a
Actually,
short episode, but
I'm going to say, as a journalist here, your university's advice was good. When you do meet people who are quite over the top and gunning for you, it is always a good idea to say as little as possible. Or alternatively, if you are in the deep shit, what you need to say is, there will be an investigation, to give you time. And you have an investigation of some kind. You know, because I
but
mean,
it's just
and cover up. I mean, the other thing I want to say here, in case people listen, when something's gone wrong, and let's say you've been doing something to a rat, there's a picture being taken, and out there is a rat.
I've never done anything to a rat. Just for the record, hang on. I don't do anything with rats.
But there you are, your university lab, and this rat is a picture of a rat screaming in agony, and you're in deep trouble. Do not try to cover it up. The answer is because that makes the story go on longer. It goes on, and if you look at all sorts of scandals, including the royal family, anything you like to think about, it's when people don't come clean at the beginning that it goes on for weeks, months, and sometimes years. So it's, hold your hand up at some point.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen lots of politicians fall on that one recently, haven't we?
And universities getting,
and as I said,
they can't help it.
No, and we all make mistakes, and this is what I mean. We just need to be a little bit more forgiving, and not think that I am so glad that I grew up when there were not mobile phones taking pictures of everything. I mean, yeah. Was that you beeping all of a sudden?
That's my beep, and if I turn it off, you won't be able to hear me. So I'll have to. It's just an email coming in which beeps.
Okay. So yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, is that we shouldn't rush to judge others, and just be a little bit more forgiving, and get away from this idea that people can be perfect. I saw an interesting comedy piece actually. Oh dear, we're going to have lots of emails coming in. So there was the point they were making was that you can have people have good ideas, but they become so fanatical about it that they take it to such an extreme that they start to deny human nature. And he starts off, and he starts off by talking about things like communism, the idea that you could get rid of selfishness in people are selfish, and so it doesn't work, no matter how brutal you are in relation to it. And he then moves on to the woke movement. And I think, personally, I think this is an issue that people are being told that they're wrong to have thoughts in their heads. It sort of takes us back to the books earlier, and some of the stuff that should and shouldn't be in them. I'm a great believer that we all get thoughts in our heads. It's how we act on them that's important.
Yes.
And if I'm frustrated with something, I'll blurt something out. I don't mean it, but it allows me to reset and move on. And but I'm not going to act on it. I'm trying to work with something today, and the university computer system wasn't working. And I would like to garrote the person that ordered it. I don't really mean that, but but it's just the frustration, and you just think, well, you can't. If you maybe there are people there who really do have angelic lives and never have a bad thought, but I doubt it, and I suspect it's what eats up a lot of people, that they don't accept themselves as being imperfect beings, and making mistakes, and that perhaps thinking some bad things. What's important is we surround ourselves with people who keep us on the straight and narrow a little bit when we stray.
What is particularly difficult, though, I think, for people when in relationship to animals is when is keeping up to date, is being willing to be open-minded. I mean, my heart sinks when somebody says to me, "You can't teach me anything about cats. I've been dealing with them for 20 years." Well, you know, so they're 20 years out of date. That means if you can't teach them anything new, you know. And I remember your study about cats not having that particular form of attachment to humans. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it took me a long time, Daniel, because I was in the audience at the time when you were talking about it. I did go away and read it, and but it took me a long time because it seemed to cry out against everything I knew, because I knew some of my cats loved me, whatever that is, as someone rather posher than me has said, So I think we do have to accept it's really difficult to change your ideas, and it really took all my strength of being to go and sit with 18-year-olds for a science degree in order to get to your master's, I might say. If I could have gone straight, I would have done. To do that at the age of 63, it was hard work. It was difficult. It was difficult. It was embarrassing. It was difficult. And I loved every minute of it, actually, but I discovered, changing your point of view is really difficult the older you get.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I have enormous admiration for you doing that. And interestingly, my former boss from general practice before I moved into academia, in his 60s, he went off and did an undergraduate degree in behaviour as well, Dick Lane. And good on both of you for doing that. I'm not sure what I'll be doing in my 60s, but I don't think I'll be signing up for extra degrees.
Oh, you're going to do English literature. English literature, Daniel. Then
no, I don't think so. I'm more likely to do something like digital photography, something creative in the arts like that doesn't involve, where you can express yourself. But so I'm saying about people change. But the other thing is, so there is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you've got people who don't know what they don't know, so they're the worst judges of their own competence. They think they're far more competent than they are, and there's lots of examples where more than 50% of people think that they're in the top half of their particular profession, etc. And so there's that aspect. But I think the other thing is with companion animals is we are so emotionally invested in them. So we don't think about them in terribly rational ways. And I don't know if I've said it on this podcast. I love pugs, but I won't get a pug. I have 2 life-size pugs actually in my office. They remain off camera, and I just look at them. And I've got fond memories as a kid growing up with one of our near neighbours having had a pug, and I think they're great characters. But this is where I can actually use my rational brain, and I'm just concerned about it. Well, maybe I should rescue one, but am I then promoting them, etc.? I don't know. At the moment, we've not had a dog since been married or anything like that, because of my lifestyle traveling. It's not. I don't think it's fair on a dog, and I think I'll probably remain in that way. But I can see the attraction. And it goes back to what we're saying. We respond to very simple cues. And in the case of things like a lot of the short-nosed breeds, we think that, the big eyes, the high foreheads, the short nose are infantile features that intrinsically make us respond in an emotional way. And because we respond in an emotional way, then we think about things differently. We don't think about things rationally. We think about them in a very centered. And I don't know if there's anything published on it, but I remember chatting to Peter Sanne, who's an ethicist from Denmark, and he did some neat stuff where he looked at people's relationships, and we got chatting about whether or not also having a slightly abnormal gait also brings out that caring emotion. So you think about a toddler, we think it's quite cute the way they walk. So actually having animals that are somewhat lame might also be at a subconscious level very attractive to us. And I know that sounds really weird, but just what I mean by that, and when we talk about the care system, what it means is I want to look after and I want to protect you.
Yeah.
And as soon as we get looped in on that, on the emotion, then the way that we process, because emotion also affects the way we think, even when we start to analyze it, we're very biased in the way that we think about it. So we can then think, oh well, I'm being rational. But the problem is you're irrational in whilst you're in a mode of caring,
Yeah.
as opposed to cold rationality.
Well,
And so, sorry.
there are the extremes. I mean, I'm really interested in animal hoarders. At one point, I wanted to do a master's about animal hoarders, but I couldn't quite think how to do it, to be honest. And these are people that there are people who have too many animals, and there are people who are definitely off the wall. And I spoke to an RSPCA inspector when I was doing some preliminary research, thinking, how could I deal with this? And he remembers walking across a room, crunching on the bones of dead cats, while a woman beside him said, "But I love every single one of my cats." And the whole house was full of dying cats, Um,
But it's a perceptual issue. You do not see it once your emotions switch on. We all have blind spots about things, and again, there's this fallacy that our senses present us with the real world. They don't. They present us with a view of the world that favors our survival. So we can be completely blind to things if they're not important to us, or if we're thinking about things in a certain way. So I mean that's a pretty shocking example. But a friend of mine who works for a rescue, and I won't say any more about who they are, etc. But she was telling me that they've recently taken in a load of animals from somebody who had got tens of dogs in a very, very small accommodation. And this person was trying to get the dog that would win Crufts.
yeah.
And
Yes.
so they just seem to think that, breed enough and I'll find the one. So they were completely oblivious to everything going on. They also said, well, what should we do? Do we fill our kennels with these dogs, or do we fill our kennels with the fighting dogs that are found on the street that are, that people are emotionally attached to? And she said the problem is the fighting dogs that somebody reports this dog that's been found on the street that's clearly injured, etc. They nurse it back. When they nurse it back and it's got strength, they then realize it's a complete and utter nightmare. They can't rehome it because as soon as they're aware of the risk, they're liable, regardless of anyone saying, "I'm a brilliant trainer, I will turn this dog around." If that dog was to bite them, almost certainly, they've done a risk assessment, so they can't. So if they make the decision to euthanize the dog, they then get the bad press of, well, you're a heartless charity.
I had to make a decision for a charity. I fostered a cat that bit, and he bit two people before me, and both had ended up in hospital. I had him for about 2 weeks. I thought I was taking
I
on
remember.
a frightened cat who would bite me to keep me back. He was actually quite affectionate, and he moved towards me and he caught my hand and his teeth went in, and then he did a right crunch in. I mean, I've got one that nips at the moment, but it was a proper crunch. And I had some difficulty getting antibiotics in time, but I did. And I thought to myself, what do I do? I reckoned if I had 2 more bites, I might be able to assess what was happening. But I also thought, at my age anyway, this was too big a risk. And also there was no doubt that you could not hand that cat out to anybody. He was a dangerous cat, and I had to go to
I
them
think, yeah.
and say he must be put down, and I dealt with it. But they were very upset by it and said, "But we don't like putting down healthy cats." But I mean, you could argue that that cat was mentally unhealthy, for at least for a role as a pet. You see,
Well, you wonder what sort of life it was. Yeah.
he couldn't go into stables because he was very affectionate as well as biting. He would have bitten somebody
Yeah.
if he'd been housed in a stable or in a barn, I reckon.
And I think it's really tough for the charities because, as I said, they depend on public donations. But then somebody goes and bad mouths, and the world of social media take. They don't, going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier. People don't go and find out the truth of the story. The
Yeah.
reality is, increasingly, a lot of people are asking the charities to do the dirty work for them. Well, no, no, not dirty work. To make the responsible decision that, for whatever reason, they can't do.
Yeah.
And I think there's many reasons why that happens. One of them is that maybe because of their emotional investment, they're just not capable of making that.
Mm.
And it's easy. Well, I guess it's relatively easy for me as a vet to say this, but I do believe that euthanasia is a gift we can give our pets that we're not allowed to give our family. And I understand the reasons why you're not allowed to give them to humans, because there's vested interest in inheritance and stuff like that. But I do think that it's a blessing. And I remember we had a cat called Rosie when I first qualified, and met my wife. And when I came back from a conference, and she'd got a bit of dementia, and when I came back from the conference, it was clear that her quality of life had suffered. And I'd been away for about a week, and I just looked at, and Connie had been having the doubts. The boys were quite young. I just, no, this can't go on. We've got to make the decision for her. Um, and I made the decision and took her to one of my friends who had a vet practice locally, and he put her to sleep. And that was the first animal I'd seen put to sleep since I'd left practice. I'm trying to think, probably more than 10 years ago. Oh God, that hit me like a ton of bricks.
Mm.
And I was just sort of whoa. But I never doubted that I'd made the right decision. And it's tough. God, it hurts. But it was the last good thing I could do for Rosie,
Yeah.
was making that decision. Um, and I fully accept that other people may have different opinions, etc. But I'm not a believer in quantity of life. I'm a believer in quality of life.
Yeah.
And so it is just that, and it is tough. But there are some people I think who emotionally find it very difficult to make that decision, and they hand over in whatever state. There are other people who, are just, I think, irresponsible.
Mm.
But people have got to understand, the complexity of these issues, and that, anybody working in a rescue is not doing it because they want to kill animals. They're not doing it because they want to make lots of money. They are trying to do the best for the animals with the limited resources they've got. So if they do end up putting an animal to sleep, euthanizing an animal, whatever you want to call it, there's almost certainly going to be a good reason for it.
Mm.
And if you've got 60 kennels, are you going to fill them with you know dogs that stand a good chance of going into a home and making a life with someone, even if they've got medical issues? Or are you going to fill it with ex-fighting dogs who, you know as and some of them can be absolutely brilliant dogs, don't get me wrong, but there's a limited pool of people who can handle those dogs safely in society.
Yeah.
um and you got 60 kennels, you got more than 120 dogs that want to go in there. What decisions are you going to make?
It's.
And what are they supposed to do?
I think also people
And
think
as I said, and I think,
you can't really safely retrain a dangerous animal, can you? I mean, because of spontaneous recovery,
well, the thing is living with an animal is not risk free. um so there's always that element of risk. The case recently, that where the um child was killed, I think it was a 5-year-old child with the husky cross that was killed. I understand that dog may have been rehomed by a rescue charity,
Mm.
um, and not a small rescue charity, is what I've heard. I'm not going to say any names
Yeah.
because I don't know. But if that is the case,
Mm.
um, and that charity normally makes assessments, it will be interesting to know what that assessment found
Mm.
and what decisions were made.
Mm.
And if it is a relatively big charity, you can be pretty sure that there's going to be a lawyer out there who's going to pursue it,
Yeah.
because if they can find liability against the charity and make money from somebody, often people will go down that route, which potentially means we're going to get a legal precedent on decisions that shelters have to make with regards to whether they rehome or whether they euthanize.
Mm.
And then if you've got charities that have a no-kill policy, for example, what are they supposed to do? They'll just have to hold on to them,
Well, I think then you take
Um,
the view that that the animal is mentally ill, if you like to say, like you would about a
well,
serial killer human being. They have to be locked up because they're
mm, yeah.
difficult.
But
You can't.
anyway,
Oh,
um, I'm conscious of time because I also know you're going out this evening, and I don't want to hold you up. But I did mention at the beginning we've written a book together, and I'm terrible, but I'm going to shamelessly plug the book, Being Your Cat. And as I said, I enjoyed my little input into it, so thank you for asking me to be part of it. Just out of interest, which bits of the book do you like most, or what do you like most about the book?
uh, um, uh, what I like
Here's
most.
your chance to sell your book to lots of people.
Well,
Actually, it's not that many people listen to the
I think
podcast, so
I know it sounds scientific, but in actual fact, if you can imagine yourself in somebody else's position, it helps you understand their life, and therefore imagining yourself as your cat, what it feels like to be a cat, and how you're going to live as a cat, is a way, I hope, of improving welfare. Really, because I feel
yeah, no,
passionate about not most cats have terrific lives, it's not that, but I'm pretty worried about cats stuck in shelters, and I'm pretty worried about cats that are should be out there living in stables and who are trying to cope in a home. And I'm none too happy about indoor only cats.
no, I can relate to that, and I think it's we I wrote a little book with Helen Zulch, and a lot of people sort of know the life skills for puppies one, but the one I really like, actually, the life skills is good, but was Helping Minds Meet.
Mm.
And it's about sort of realizing that we view the world differently, but that doesn't mean we can't have a great partnership. And when I was writing this, that was one of the things that came back to me was, it's that getting the perspective. It's not about being anthropomorphic. It's about, as you say, trying to see the world more through the cat's eyes and nose and ears, etc., and appreciating it. And that doesn't make it any less of an individual. It makes it more of an individual, and more marvelous. And I've been really pleasantly surprised because I gave Connie a copy of this, my wife, and she said, "Oh, I didn't know that about cats." And I was thinking, "Oh, so there is some stuff in here that," because I'm thinking, "Oh, well, this is all basic stuff which surely people know," but no, it's not just basic stuff, I guess.
And lots of basic stuff people don't know. I mean, I have a relative who seriously believes to stop a dog jumping up, what you do is knee them in the ribs, hoping you don't break their kidneys in the process, and then they won't jump up again, because that's what she was told by her father. And there's folk wisdom.
Yeah, no, that's and so there is that attitude with it, but no, for me, it's, as I said, it's been an interesting experience, and it is a lovely cover, isn't it?
It is a great cover, and I was
Little
thrilled.
cat on the cover.
I was thrilled because it was great having your knowledge input, but also I don't know if you may have missed this email, but I wanted to tell you that I think you might have a future in journalism, because you are well capable, and I want to say this of everybody I've met within the academic world, of writing simple prose that other people can understand. And actually, if you look at science publications, some of them are really difficult unless you've got a handle on the jargon, you know?
Oh, absolutely. No, I fully get it. I do actually. I do remember when you first asked me. You did send me several emails saying, "I'm going to have editorial control over the English. You know,
Yeah.
this is non-negotiable. I'm not writing it in your English, etc." And then after some of the edits I provided on some of the chapters, you said, "Actually, that's quite nicely put, that one." I was thinking, yeah, I'm not always using long words. I
Haven't
can
written for
use
the
short
Sun.
words some of the time.
I mean, I wrote for the Sun, much more difficult than writing for the Sunday Times, you know. And all people people need information, and they, the best thing about journalism, not the worst thing. We've done awful things in journalism, and and a lot of it has been just an enormous romp. But at our best, we get information over to people who wouldn't get it any other way. And and therefore, the tabloids may be pigs in many ways, but every now and again they are useful, and they get stuff to people who wouldn't otherwise read it. That's my
I
theory.
think that's a great point at which to end, actually. That's a very positive note. And you say about being kind, so let's be kind to the tabloids at the end of this. But yeah, and that is true. It is true, and being a journalist is not um, an easy profession, but journalists can really change the world. I think, a big story
So can you.
can really.
We all can.
So,
We can all do a tiny bit to change the world. Not much. Some people, I agree, can do a lot. We can all do a tiny bit, and that's worth doing, however small.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you. And I better let you go because, as I said, I know you're going out tonight. I need you to stand up a little bit so I can see a bit more of your jumper, though, because I can see a little bit of a cat's head.
I'll go
Oh,
back.
you've got loads of cats on your jumper. Yeah, okay. That's a very smart top. So thank you once again. As I said, it's been lovely to catch up with you, and we'll chat again soon. Take care.
That would be nice. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please remember to give us a like or subscribe. It helps more than you know. We all do these episodes for free because we hope people will take something useful from them. So giving us a like and subscribing helps others find us and related content. We have a lot more episodes for you to enjoy on our podcast platform, with videos on my YouTube channel together with other resources. Just search for What Makes You Click and Daniel Mills. Subscribing to both our Facebook group and YouTube channel not only helps in a similar way, but also means you shouldn't miss when the next episode comes out. Thanks once again, and feel free to post a comment or suggestion. Bye now.